Okay friends, it's time to get started on a left front ABS sensor. To do this job, you don't necessarily need to remove the left front wheel, but we're going to do it because it makes it a little bit easier to see. Let's get into it. Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle with the suspension hanging so the wheel's off the ground. After that, we're going to move along to removing our center cover. If you were to feel along it, you're going to find an area that you can carefully get in between with a small pry bar. Once you have that cover off of there, continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. We're going to start removing the ABS sensor by coming right inside the front bumper. You can find the ABS wire leading up to a connector. Now there's going to be a little tab that you can grab onto with your index finger right along the front. I'll just carefully squeeze that and pull this down. Once I have it down, I always take a look inside both of the connector ports. Of course, for the ABS sensor, we're going to be replacing it, but up inside the wiring harness itself is also super important to pay attention to. If you see any funny colors, it's corrosion and that would have to be dealt with. Now let's go ahead and follow that ABS wire to all of its mounting points along the frame. The new ABS wire came with new brackets, so you can just go ahead and pop those right out of here. Now we're going to come over to this metallic mounting point. That's holding the ABS wire to the knuckle. We'll use an 8mm to remove the mounting bolt. Save that bolt for later. Now we're going to follow it down to where the sensor connects onto the knuckle. You'll find another 8mm bolt. Go ahead and remove it. Now we're getting to the hardest part. We're going to have to go ahead and remove the ABS sensor from the knuckle. This entire area right here is inside the knuckle. It's very common for it to be frozen in there. What I'm going to try to do is grab onto the outer aspect of the ABS sensor. I'm going to try to give it a little wiggle back and forth while I'm trying to pull it out and away from the knuckle. Grab onto this with some pliers. I'm going to rock it. At the same time as I'm rocking, I'm also pushing. It's a good idea to use some penetrant in this area. It can only help. Now at this point, if your ABS sensor is stuck inside your knuckle, which is something that's very common, the job's going to get a little bit harder. In which case, you're going to have to go ahead and remove that wheel, and then you're going to make your way out here and start disassembling the brakes. So to start taking apart the brakes, we're going to move along to the 2 caliper bracket bolts. You're going to find a 15mm right out in the open here, and the other one's going to be hidden up inside this pocket of the knuckle. Let's remove the pair. Inspect your mounting hardware as you remove it. Make sure you hold that caliper so it does not fall down. You do not want to put a tug on your flex hose. Let's carefully pull this off of the rotor. Keep in mind that you do not want your brake pads to fall out of the caliper. At this point, it really only makes sense to at least take a peek at the brake pads. Make sure it doesn't look like they're worn or damaged in any way. Now we're just going to go ahead and hang the caliper so it's putting no pressure on that flex hose. Now we're at the point we're going to start removing the rotor from the area. To remove the brake rotor, you're going to have to remove this protective dust cover. When you remove it, be very careful not to damage it. This is what protects the bearings on the inside. We'll give that cover a quick inspection. Make sure it doesn't look like it has a hole in it and it's not damaged in any way. Assuming it looks okay, go ahead and set that aside. With the cover off of there, let's go ahead and clean off any of the existing gasket that might be in the area. Once you have that out of the way, you're going to be looking for a cotter pin. That's essentially a locking pin that's going to hold this lock in position on the mounting nut. We're going to go ahead and get this cotter pin out of the way. Typically, it's a good idea to make sure that you replace these once you remove them. Generally, they are not reusable. Go ahead and remove that lock. Give that a close inspection. Set it aside. Underneath that, you're going to find that you have a nut. We're going to have to carefully start removing that nut by turning it counterclockwise. Behind that, you're going to have a washer and an outer bearing. We're going to essentially remove the nut, hold everything together, and remove the entire rotor with the bearing still installed in the rotor. Make sure you hold onto that rotor so it does not slide off. It's very heavy and it'll hurt you. Now I'm going to carefully remove the rotor. Once again, there's bearings and a washer in here. Go ahead and set that aside. With the rotor out of the way, we have a clear view of the other side of the ABS sensor. You can tell it's rusted in this area. We're going to have to go ahead and drive it out of there with a hammer and punch. But before we do, I want you to pay attention to this area. That's the axle stud that comes off of the knuckle. You need to give it a close inspection. Make sure it's not worn, damaged, rusted, or rotted in any way, especially along this area where your seal is supposed to ride. Assuming it looks okay, go ahead and cover it up so no dirt or debris makes its way onto it while we continue. Let's use a little penetrant in the area. Now we're going to continue on to driving this out of the area. To do that, you can give it a couple loving bonks with a hammer and then finish it off with a punch as well. There it is, friends. The next thing you want to do is clean the hole with a bore brush. Parts cleaner. Make sure you take a peek inside here. It shouldn't be rotted or damaged in any way. Assuming it looks good, continue with a little bit of copper never sees. Let's clean up my mess. Now we can put that ABS sensor in from the backside. If it feels like it's a little stiff, you just need to continue cleaning that hole. Now I'll continue on with my mounting bolt. I cleaned the threads and then I applied a little bit of the never sees. You don't want to apply any thread locker to this. It wouldn't make any sense. Go ahead and bottom this out. Once you bottom out your bolt, torque that to 9 foot-pounds. Now we can put some copper never sees in this mounting hole as well. We'll line up our ABS wire bracket with the area and put in our mounting bolt. Now we're just going to snug this bolt and then we'll torque this one to 6 foot-pounds. Now we can start resecuring the rest of our ABS wire. We're going to take the first clip that comes from where the ABS unit is on the knuckle, and we're going to put it so the ABS wire comes up and then starts swooping down. We'll press that right in position. Now we're going to bring this in a swooped down position and bring the ABS wire up. Slide that in as well. Now this is going to make its way all the way up and along the top of the frame. Slide that in there. Now we can bring this and we're going to put it up and over this area. You don't want to hang it down low because it could potentially get damaged. Let's take that and connect it in. Slide it up, listen for a click. Give it a tug to make sure it's completely secure. Make your way down the entire ABS wire to all of the mounting points. Grab onto them and try to remove them from the frame. Now at this point, if you did have to remove the rotor, we're going to go ahead and start reinstalling it. Make sure there's no dirt or grime on this area. Grease is good, dirt is bad. Let's have a look at the back side of the rotor. This is the seal. Make sure it's not torn or worn. If it is, now's the time to replace it. Let's go ahead and slide that in position onto the axle stud. Make sure you don't push your bearing out. It can hit the ground, it'll get damaged and dirty. Go ahead and turn that washer, slide it all together. Now don't let it go because it will slide off. Go ahead and grab that mounting nut. We'll bottom this out by hand. Now this next part is going to be very important. To tighten this nut properly, you need to make sure you're spinning the rotor. As I'm spinning it, it's going to start working out the air from inside the grease on the bearings. While I'm doing that, I'm going to continue trying to turn this nut. I'm going to loosen it and tighten it as it's spinning. You're going to find that the nut continues to tighten several turns here until it eventually stops. So right there, it's pretty much bottomed out. At this point, you don't want to grab onto it and apply any leverage. If you do, you're going to damage the bearings. It just needs to be snug. Let's put this piece on. Looking at it, you can see that it has a whole bunch of slots. And if you were to look at the axle stud, you'll find that it has a hole that goes straight down through. We want to make sure that this matches up so it lines up with the nut and it creates an area for our locking cotter pin. We'll pin that over to lock it in position. Now the next thing that I always do is clean around this area. I also like to make my way inside this groove with my clean rag. I want to try to remove the grease from the area, so when I put my dust cap on, I can use some gasket maker and it's going to create a good seal to make sure no dirt or debris makes its way into the area. Now I'll use some gasket maker all the way around this ridge. If when you were removing this cap, you ended up making a hole in it, just go ahead and make sure you seal it up with something, such as possibly even the same gasket maker. Now we're just going to go ahead and drive that cover on there as far as it can. After that, I like to spread this gasket maker around to create a perfect seal. Clean your mess. Let's slide the caliper in position. When we do this, we're trying to put the pads over the rotor. You want to be very careful not to damage your brake pads. We'll slide it right down and then we can grab our 2 caliper bracket bolts. As you go to put in your caliper bracket bolts, make sure the threading's clean and apply a thin amount of red thread locker. We're going to start each of these in, bottom them out, and then we're going to torque each of them to 83 foot-pounds. Now let's go ahead and put the wheel back up on here. We'll start on all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. Bottom them out Get the wheels safely back on the ground and then torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. We've got the wheel back on the ground. Let's torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Of course, if you have a center cover, go ahead and put that on now. Looking at the back of it, you're going to find you have one area that protrudes looking like this. That needs to fit into any of your lug nut holes. Okay friends, we got our front ABS sensor installed in the vehicle. At this point, if you happen to have had an ABS light on the dash, make sure you clear it. After that, you want to take it for a road test, make sure you don't hear any funny noises, and of course, you don't have an ABS light. Other than that, thanks for watching.